All right, Rabbi, say good morning, a guten Chodesh. It is a great zechus, Baruch Hashem. It is hard to believe on one hand that Chodesh Elul is upon us, although again, it's technically the last day, still the last day of Menachem Av, but it is hard to believe, Baruch Hashem, that once again we find ourselves in Chodesh Elul. But like we start every single month, like we start every single day, there is no better way to start it than with a beautiful, beautiful daf of Gemara. So Shechianu v'kimanu v'gana, that we get to start another month with a Kadosh Baruch Hu's beautiful Torah and to keep swimming in the Yam Shel TALMUD. We should be Zochem Yeret Hashem for many years to come. To thank all of our sponsors for this morning, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, again, still for Av. So Benjamin and Elys Wohl on the tiny Elys Wohl for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in honor of Moishe, Abramson, and Jeremy Lasson for making all the shiurim available for those outside of our physical Bais Midrash. To thank Mr. Jack Bennett for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in memory of Sergeant Nicholai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who died in a Hezbullah ambush in southern Lebanon in February 1998. To thank Jerry and Sora Wolasky for dedicating all the Shurim this month in the refuah sheleimah for Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira. And to thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Chaim and Jackie Nachman, with incredible hakaras hatov to the entire shir. And this great zechus that Emir Hashem, we were zocha to finish another mesechta, and in Baruch Hashem to begin another mesechta together as well. Should be zocha Emir Hashem do that for many, many years to come. All right, to say, let us get started. Not a lot of time, but Emir Hashem, a lot to do today. So today's daf is daf Dalid. Daf Dalid, and we are picking up, where did we leave off yesterday? 3 lines up? Sounds good. Okay, so we'll say, all right, good, right. So we're talking about the idea. Remember, we left off with 2 questions yesterday. I actually say the Gemara started off with 2 questions yesterday. The 2 dots on Gimel Beis. What are the 2 questions? Number 1, from where do we learn that halacha l'maisa you could affect Kiddushin with kesef? That's part 1. And part 2, how do we know that the father gets to keep that money? So I will say, so the Gemara went ahead and essentially was focusing on the 2 psukim. Pasuk number 1 was, V'yatsa chinam ein kasef. Now, happens to remember again, we know that pasuk is talking about Amma HaIvriya. It's actually talking about, again, a Jewish maidservant. And the Gemara darshaned, when she leaves her master, she leaves with no money. The inference from that is that master, so to speak, doesn't get any money, but there is another person with autonomy over this girl who does get money. Who is that? That's her father, ultimately, who receives her kesef kiddushin. Then there was another pasuk. The other pasuk was benuareha Bais aviha. When she, up through the point of her na'arus, right, she is in her father's home. The Gemara darshan, what that means is any quote-unquote benefit that technically accrues to her through na'arus goes to the father. That would also be a right that the father gets to keep the kesef kiddushin, the money for kiddushin. So the Gemara then wanted to suggest, the Gemara was saying, 1 second, that pasuk of B'nura Beis Aviha is talking about Hafaras Nedarim, right? It's talking about the father's ability to go ahead and annul her vows. That's really what it's talking about. So the Gemara wanted to say, so maybe we should, this is like we're doing yesterday's daf all over again. Okay, fine. Right? So the Gemara says, we should be able to learn out from Hafaras Nedarim, just like the father could be mefer her Nedarim, so too he gets to keep her kesef kiddushin. So the Gemara says you can't do that because Nedarim are Isser, kesef kiddushin is mamon. You can't learn out mamon from Isser. Fine. Then the Gemara says v'chitema neilif miknasa. Maybe we should learn from knas. Right? I will say the fact. Remember again, if she's violated, there's a penalty payment that's paid. Who gets to keep that penalty payment? The father. So the same way that the father gets to keep the penalty payment, the father should be able to get her kesef kiddushin. But the Gemara says mamon miknas al yafinon. You can't learn out mamon from knas. Right? You can't learn mamon from knas. We'll say why. Remember knas. We know we've learned this before. In the world of financial payments, there's 2 different types of payments. There's mamon and there's knas. Wherein lies it? Right? Literally, mamon is money. Knas is penalty. What's the distinction between mamon and knas? Mamon is a logical payment. In other words, there's a reason for the payment. Knas is an arbitrary number that the Torah came up with that is totally unrelated, potentially unrelated, to the person who you have to pay to. So I will say, so knas in general is a chiddush, right? It's something novel. You can't learn out other halachas from the chiddush. Good, so the Gemara goes weiter. Maybe you can learn from Boshes of Ganabos. Say, when you injure someone, there are multiple buckets of payment that you have to pay. Amongst those payments are Boshes and Pegam. Boshes is humiliation, right? Pegam is depreciation. depreciation. So those are not penalty payments. That's mamon payments you have to pay. Now, a father is technically entitled to his daughter's boshes and pegam. How do we know this? Rashi points out because listen to this: a father has the ability to marry off his daughter to whoever he wants. Right? So means Rashi points out, for example, he can marry off his daughter to a guy who's a mukkah shchin, stricken with boils, all right, terrible looking guy. Right? So, which means what? Now that, of course, would be embarrassing and humiliating for her. The fact that he has the right to go ahead and halacha l'maisa do that indicates to us, well, actually, I'm getting to the answer a little bit more. Surah from Boshes and Pegam. Why don't we say it just like the father gets the Boshes and Pegam payments? So too we get the Kiddushin payments. The Gemara says, Shiny Boshes and Pegam davua shaykh begabayu. Boshes and Pegam are different. Why? Because the father has a right in them. Now, that's really what I was looking for. What does it mean he has a right in them? The fact that the father has the ability to marry off his daughter to whoever he wants, even someone for whom it would be humiliating for the daughter to be married to, indicates to us that a father by definition has rights in those payments. So because he has rights in those payments, therefore halacha l'maisa, it makes sense that he has an entitlement, or I should say he has an automatic entitlement. Therefore you can't learn out kesef kiddushin from that. Fine. Ela mistabra, dichi kamemait, top of Dalit, Yitzia dikavase kamemait. Rather, I will say the Gemara says, let's go back for just a moment, and it must be that really we're learning this out from the pasuk of v'yatsa chinam ein kasef. So we're going back to our original source. From where do we learn that a father is entitled to the kesef kiddushin of his daughter? Now, boss, remember again, this is kesef kiddushin up through what age? Through Naros, right? Through 12 years old and 6 months. Obviously, once she becomes a Bogeres, then of course, again, that kesef kiddushin is her own. But through Naros, so the Gemara says, we're learning it out from the pasuk, v'yatsa chinam ein kasef. That the pasuk is telling us that this type of yitzia, this type of exit, i.e. the emancipation of an Amma Ivriya, Jewish maidservant, in that no money accrues to the master. But when there is a different type of quote-unquote exit, for example, a daughter leaves her father's home to get married, the father is entitled to that money. Look at Rashi, because the Gemara says the pasuk must be coming to exclude a similar type of exit. Rashi says, Yitzias erusin dumya yitzias amo, kamemait midin amo. Because in certain respects, the exit of an Amma Ivriya from her master is somewhat similar to the exit of a daughter from her father's home. I will say, in which way are they similar? They're similar in that, remember, in both cases, she's exiting the domain or the authority of someone who is entitled to certain things. So therefore, again, I will say, when the pasuk says, V'yatsa chinam ein kasef, the Torah is telling us, this yitzia, this exit of the Amma Ivriya, does not result in the master getting money. But there is another yitzia, another exit, which will result in the quote-unquote master getting money. What is that case? What's that case? Kiddushin. Kiddushin, that when the girl is betrothed, ultimately her father gets her kesef Kiddushin. The Gemara says, V'hai lo damya, but I don't understand. V'hai lo damya, hai yitzia, hai yitzia. But in reality, the Gemara says the exits are not similar. The exit of Amma Ivriya is not similar to the exit, ultimately again, of the daughter. Hasam nafkala mereshus adon legamre. Rabbi say, remember again, when an Amma Ivriya is emancipated, she's totally emancipated, right? She is absolutely removed from the domain of her master. V'hacha akati michsera mesira l'chuppah. Rabbi say, here in the case of the daughter, as much as when she receives kesef kiddushin, ultimately, again, there is a quasi-marriage. She's only not quasi-marriage, there is kiddushin. She is only fully removed from the domain of her father when? After she goes to the chuppah. After she goes to the chuppah. That's what, so in other words, the exits are not really similar. To which the Gemara says, Ba'afaras nadara miha nafkala mirshusei. You're right, but at least when it comes to annulment of vows, in certain respects, once she receives kesef kiddushin, that is enough to remove her from her father's domain. Disna nara hamurasa, when you have a nara literally a nara who has kiddushin, avia ubayla mafiri nidaraha. in order for her vows to be annulled, both her father and her husband must participate. So I will say, essentially, all we need to show is that Kiddushin results in some form of exit from the father's domain in order to go ahead and equate her with Ama Ivriya. So I will say, so again, I just want to point out that what we have over here is we've answered our question. Right? Remember again, what was our question? Our two-pronged question. Number one, how do we know that Kesef works for Kiddushin? And number two, how do we know that the father gets the money? So interestingly enough, the beauty is one-stop shopping. Both of our questions answered by one drasha. The drasha is, V'yatza chinam ein kasef. By Ama Ivriya, Pasuk says, she exits the relationship, ein kasef. The master gets no money. The Gemara infers from there that in other cases, the master does get money. What's the other case? Girl who accepts, who receives Kesef Kiddushin, right? A Nara, or it could be also a Nara who receives Kesef Kiddushin, that money goes to her father. So that one drasha answers both. So from there we see that money works for Kiddushin, and we also know that halach, although we have a different drasha for money working for Kiddushin as well, that the father gets the money. Beautiful. 1 second. But is that pasuk v'yatza chinam ein kasef? Is that coming to teach us that the father gets the kesef kiddushin? We need it for another drasha. We need it for another drasha. What's the other drasha? Here we go. Disanya v'yatza chinam elu yemei bagrus ein kasef elu yemei narus. So we're supposed to listen to this. The Gemara says that pasuk v'yatza chinam ein kasef is actually needed for a different drasha. What's the drasha? The drasha is actually about the actual emancipation of a girl. When does an Ama Ivriya, when does a Jewish maidservant go free? So the Gemara darshins, v'yatza chinam, that refers to Yimei Bagrus, when she becomes a Bogeres. We'll say, remember again, when does a girl become a Bogeres? What age? 12 years old and 6 months. Right? So if she becomes a Bogeres, she goes free. Ein Kasef teaches me, Elu Yimei Narus. This refers to when she is a Nara. When she is a Nara, 12 years old. 12 years old. So I will say, so it teaches me that emancipation occurs at potentially two different stages. So I need that pasuk for a different drasha. Amar Ravina, im kain, lema kra ein kasef. My ein kasef. So we'll say, watch this. So the Gemara says, if that was the case, the pasuk should have said ein kasef. Now we'll say, what's the difference between ein kasef and ein kasef? The yud. The Gemara is pointing out over here that there's an extra yud in the word ein that wasn't necessarily needed. The fact that you have a superfluous yud, an extra yud, allows us to darshan. My ein kesef, what does ein kesef mean? Ein kesef la'adon ze'av al yesh kesef la'adon acher. Comes to teach you there is no money to this master, i.e. the master of the Ama Ivriya, but there is money in another case to a master, which is the case of the kesef kiddushin going to the father. Incredible. Umayni hu'av. So we'll say, so now 1 second. Now, you just totally took the conversation in a different route. We'll say, now what you're telling me is, really, the drasha is based on the extra yud. Meaning, up until this entire time, we were focusing on the idea of v'yatza chinam ein kasef. So the drasha is, this girl, Ama Ivriya, goes out, and there is no giving of money. The master has no money. We darshan, it's in this case the master gets no money, but there's another case where the authority figure does get money. What's that case? Kesef Kiddushin going to the father. So the Gemara said, 1 second, I need that pasuk for something else. To teach you that the Ama Ivriya goes out either by Narus or by Bagrus. To which the Gemara says, no, we're darshaning the extra yud. That's what really gives us the fuel for the drasha. It could have said ein kesef, just aleph nun. It puts in there an extra yud. That's what we're darshaning. So Gemara says, whoa, how do you know that you darshan extra yuds? In other words, I understand the word could have been written in a shorter fashion. Could have just been written ein aleph nun. Now that there's an extra yud, how do you know that you darshan extra yuds? Listen to this, I will say. This is fascinating. Disanya, bezera ein la. Context. Shabbos say that halacha is if you have a woman who is the daughter of a Kohen. It's called a Rachel. Rachel is the daughter of a Kohen. As the daughter of a Kohen growing up, she was always eating truma. Now what happens to Rachel? What happens? She marries down. Right? And who does she marry? A simple, regular, humble Yisrael. So when she is married to a Yisrael, right, hopefully again her husband makes her happy, but one thing he can never give her no matter how much he tries. is truma. So I will say, so now, as long as she is married to that Yisrael, she can no longer eat truma. What happens if her husband dies? Her Yisrael husband dies. So the halacha is, she's allowed to go back to her father's home and eat truma, assuming she has no surviving offspring from her husband. If there's surviving offspring, they preclude her from eating truma. So the pasuk says, "V'zera ein la." She has no offspring. So again, so that teaches if she has no offspring, then she could go and go back to her father's home and eat truma. Ainli ela zara. I only know this about her children. Zera minayin. We'll say, how do we know that it's even true if she has grandchildren? In other words, we'll say, what happens if you have a situation where Rachel was married for many years, Baruch Hashem, and unfortunately her children predeceased her, but she has grandchildren. She has grandchildren. So how do I know that the existence of grandchildren will prevent her from eating truma? Talmud lomar zera ein la. Both say, if you notice, the ein is written with a yud, longer form, and we vocalize it as ayin la. Investigate her. In other words, look into her family. Look into her family. Does she have children? Does she have grandchildren? And the presence of grandchildren will also preclude her from eating truma. So I'll say, again, as fascinating as the halacha is, why is this being brought down here? You see, what are we darshaning? The yud. The Eili Ela Zera kosher. Furthermore, I only know that kosher offspring, right, legitimate offspring, ultimately again will prevent her from marrying, from eating truma. Zera pasim nine. But let's say Rachel married a guy and he was a mamzer. I don't just mean that was the opinion of her family about the guy. I mean like legitimately, like halachically, he's a mamzer. So now both say she has offspring from him, but the offspring are psulim. So how do I know that even the presence, right, even the existence of offspring who are pasul also will preclude her from eating truma? Talmud lomar zera ein lo ayin lo. Ayin lo, investigate her. Ayvaha afikse le zera zara. One second. You just used ein lo, the yud, to teach me about grandchildren. How can you use the same word then to teach me about zera pasul? Even offspring that may be genealogically unfit, to which the Gemara says, you're right, zera zara lo itzrichkra. The truth is, you don't need a pasuk to teach you about grandchildren. Why? Well, this is very beautiful. Tibnei banim hareim kibanim. Because grandchildren are like children. Grandchildren are like children. Others will say, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that halacha l'maisa, that if she has grandchildren, that would preclude her from eating truma. That I don't need. That's obvious, because grandchildren are just like children. Really, the drasha, the extra yud, is coming to teach you even zera pasul. Even if she has offspring that are genealogically unfit, they will preclude her ultimately again from going. They'll preclude her from going back to her father's home and eating truma. Ki itzrich kra l'zera pasul. I will say, such a beautiful idea, right? B'nei banim harehem kibanim. I think that those of us who are zocha to grandchildren also know the truth is it's really b'nei banim yoser tovim banim, right? That sometimes there's even a beauty in grandchildren that I come to really appreciate this. That when you're raising your own children, often you're so running around in so many different directions and just in a different stage of life that I think, at least I know I often reflect on this and I'm very remorseful about this, how many parts of my own children's lives I've missed. Just by not being there, not in a bad way. I wasn't playing golf, but just not there, not present. And if I was there, often just like not emotionally or cognitively present. And kind of as a person gets older and hopefully just a tad wiser, and you feel like you have a shtickle second chance with grandchildren to kind of be attentive in those areas where perhaps you were not as attentive with your own children. It's a bracha. Sometimes it's like a second lease on life, like a second chance to kind of be able to be the father or the mother you wanted to be the first time around, but didn't necessarily get to do it the way you wanted to do it. Plus, they go home, right? Which is incredible as well. So Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says as follows: V'tana gufei minalei didarshachi. So I'll say, our Tana. From where do we know that we darshan the extra yud? So Amri Ksira, let's listen to this. So in general, we'll say, so this is interesting. So here's an example. Ultimately, again, of the fact that we see that we do darshan an extra yud. Right, so the Gemara says, but where's like the source? Like, where does our Tana know it's from? So the Gemara says, Ksiv me'ein bilam ume'ein yivami delo kasa behu yud. So we'll say v'hal kasa behu yud shvami la drashu dasa. So we'll say the Tana just picks up on the fact that you could see there's nothing random in the Torah. So sometimes, for example, me'ein bilam is without a yud. Me'ein yivami, right, without a yud. So ultimately, I want to say, see examples of sometimes where the yud is there, the yud is not there. Obviously, if sometimes it's included, sometimes it's not included, is to teach me that it isn't. When it is included, ultimately, it's for drasha purposes. So I will say, so quite beautiful. So again, it's halacha l'maisa. The Gemara says, me'ein kesef. Ein kesef, so it's almost like a double drasha over here. So what we're doing is everything's still coming from the same pasuk. V'yatsa chinam ein kasef. V'yatsa chinam ein kasef. See, either we're darshaning again simple drasha, ein kesef la'adon zu, v'yesh kesef la'adon zu. There's no kesef for this master, there is kesef for this master. No kesef for Amma Ivriya, but there is kesef that goes kesef kiddushin to the father. But also that extra yud gives us the license to drasha as well, and darshan as well. Incredible. V'tzrich l'michtav kiddusha l'aviyah, v'tzrich l'michtav ma'isiyadeh l'aviyah. So I want to say, so now we have two psukim, right? So remember again, we have one pasuk that teaches me that kiddushin money goes to the father, and a second pasuk that teaches me that the earnings of the girl go to the father. Why do I need both? Right? In other words, two different psukim. Rashi says over here, the fact that the father has the ability to sell his daughter as a maidservant teaches us that her earnings go to her father. So why do I need two psukim? We'll say one to teach me that kesef kiddushin goes to the father, a second pasuk to teach me earnings. I'll tell you why. Because had the Torah just said that the kesef kiddushin goes to the father, I would have thought, you know why? Because halacha l'maisa, the girl didn't earn that money, so to speak, right? There was no tircha, there was no effort expended in the acquisition of kiddushin money. That's why it goes to the father. But Abba say her earnings, now remember her earnings, which she worked for, so bepashtus, I would say, maybe that does go to her. So the Gemara goes weiter. Furthermore, again, I would understand if the earnings go to the father. Why? Because he could use those earnings to help offset the cost of her support. Aval kiddusha dene'ama ka'asila, but kesef kiddushin, which again just kind of, in other words, he wasn't counting on it. It kind of just came to him. I would have thought maybe that goes to the girl. Therefore, tzvicha. So I'll say, I say, can't earn out one from the other. I need two separate drashas. So I'll say, but bottom line, what we've established is that number one, kesef kiddushin goes to the father. Number two, her earnings go to the father. Number three, the source for kesef kiddushin as well as kesef kiddushin going to the father. V'yatsa chinam ein kasef. And a double drasha, either in kesef li adon zu, v'yesh kesef la adon acher. There's no money to this master, but there is money that goes to the father, and the extra yud in ein. Incredible. Weiter. Gufa v'yatzachinem elu yemei bagros in kasef elu yemei naros. We'll say, remember again, one of the other drashas that the Gemara wanted to suggest for this pasuk was not a drasha by kesef kiddushin, but instead a drasha ultimately again for Amma Ivriya herself to teach us that Yasachinam ultimately again is Imei Bagros, is halacha l'maisa that she goes free as a Bulgaris, and Yasachinam is Bagros, Ein Kasef Naros. She goes free at one of two stages. So Gemara says, I don't understand. V'lichtov Rachmani Naros lo boi Bagros. Why do you need both those drashas? I was say, just tell me that she goes free as a Nara. I will say, if she goes free as a Nara, then what? There's nothing to talk about by Bagros. So the Gemara says, Amaraba ba zeh v'limeid al zeh. So I will say, there's actually a very interesting concept. There's a concept I will say, Rabbi says, this one comes to teach about that one. Also, sometimes when the Torah is not explicit about what it's talking about, if you would just learn out if Torah would just say one thing, you would automatically assume one way. For example, had the Torah just told me, V'yatzachinam ein kazev, and it tells me about emancipation, and the Torah just spoke about one stage of emancipation, I would have assumed the Torah is talking about Bagros. Only now that the Torah that we're darshaning that she goes free at two different stages, could I say that one of those is Bagros and one of those is Naros? Had I just learned that it was one stage, I would have just automatically assumed Bogaras. So that's what it means. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, we're almost right across in Rashi. Mitoch shelo pirish na'aros b'mikra, ela me'elav hu lamad, since the Torah doesn't explicitly say that an Amma Ivriya goes free at Naros. Rather, again, we're just darshaning that out. See, he says, She'ein lano davar achar litlos litziyasabo hutzrach lichtov shnehem. Dikasev chad hava amina bagros luda ashmo inon kra. Aval Naros lo mapik ba chaver v'limei that love. So I'll say, so again, had the Torah just told me she goes straight at a particular stage, I would have automatically assumed that is bagros. It's only once now we darshan that there are two stages that I recognize. One is narus and one is bagros. Very interesting. Midi dahave at toshav v'sacher. So I will say, give you another example of this. This is like the case of toshav and sacher. Who are the cases of toshav and sacher? So I will say, this is talking about different Hebrew servants, Jewish servants, owned by a Kohen. So the Torah discusses that a toshav and a sacher cannot eat truma. Cannot eat truma. These are Jewish servants who work for a Kohen, cannot eat truma. So the Gemara is like this. This anya, toshav. Who's a toshav? Zecharya kinyan olam. So we'll say the toshav is the Eved Ivri who had his ear pierced. Right? Remember again, how long do you stay in servitude if you have your ear pierced? Till Yovel. Till Yovel. So that's what means the olam. Right? He stays in perpetuity. He stays forever. Sachir, Zecharya kinyan shanim. That's just the guy who's just there for a number of years, right? Until Shemitah, for a number of years. So the Gemara says, Zeh Kani Kinyan Shanim. So Yomar, so we'll say, so neither of these individuals have the ability to eat Truma. Now we'll say, now why not? Why not? In order to eat Truma, we'll say you have to either be a family member of the Kohen or owned by a Kohen. So we'll say, little interesting piece of halachic trivia. An Eved Kinani could eat Truma, an Eved Ivri cannot eat truma. Fascinating, no? Why? Very simple distinction. An Eved Kinani is owned by his master. He is a piece of property. An Eved Ivri is not owned. We'll say a Jew can never be owned by anyone else except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Cannot be owned. He's a servant, right? He has to work for his master, but he is not owned. He is not property to his master. And as such, again, halacha l'maisa, he can't eat truma. And I will say, the Torah tells me two different people can't eat truma, a toshav and a sachir. A toshav is someone who is in servitude until Yovel. Ultimately, a sachir is someone who's in servitude only for a certain number of years. To which the Gemara says, Yomar toshav lo yomar sachir. So we'll say, obviously, why doesn't the pasuk just say toshav, right? And you don't need to say sachir. In other words, if the Eved who is there until Yovel can't eat truma, then what? Certainly the Eved who's only there for a couple of years can't eat truma. If the guy who is there again for many years until Yovel can't eat, certainly the Eved who's only there for a couple of years can't eat. To which the Gemara says, Ilu kain hayisi omer toshav zakanu kinyan shanim, aval kani kinyan olam ochel. So we'll say, here's the problem. Toshav and sachir are nondescript terms. So had the Torah just written one of them, I would have assumed, who's a toshav? Who's a toshav? That's the guy who's only there for a couple of years. And I would have assumed that the Eved who is there until Yovel, that's what? That Allah Chamaisa, he does get to eat. Therefore, again, bas sacher v'limit al toshav, therefore we'll say only once the Torah includes the word sachir, do I know now that it's referring to two different people. So it must be that sachir is the Eved who's there for a number of years. Toshav is the Eved who's there until Yovel. And it teaches me, so we'll say, it's interesting. So what the Gemara is describing over here is that halacha l'maisa, sometimes when you have nondescript terms, if the Torah would have only said one, I would have assumed that that's the most obvious. So for example, if the Torah would have just said sachir or toshav, a toshav can't eat truma. I would have assumed that toshav means what? An Eved who's only there for a couple of years. But an Eved who's there until Yovel, he could certainly eat truma. Only once the Torah used Lasson of both toshav and sachir, now I understand that what? Now I understand, there are two different types of avadim. Toshav is there until Yovel. Sachir is only there for a couple of years. Neither have the ability to eat truma. Shabbos says, so, Saloch al-Maisa is the same concept by the Amma Ivriya. Only once it says V'yat Zachinam and in Kasef, I know that refers to both Naros and Bagros. Because had it just said one, I would have assumed she's in servitude until Bagros. Only once we have a second term that I also understand she's actually emancipated by Naros. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. You can't compare the two cases of Amma Ivri and Eved Ivri. Why? Hasam Trey Gufininhu. Here say by Eved Ivri, we're talking about two different types of Abadim. Right? Dechi Nami Kasav Rachmana Toshav Nirtza Lo Yochal. Vahadar Kasav Idach Haveschir Sabose even had the Torah written Toshav Nirtza. Even had the Torah gone ahead and been more specific and told us that the Toshav is the Eved whose ear has been pierced. So that he is there until Yovel. Right? Vahadar Kasav Idach. So say at that point, had you known that the Eved who was there until Yovel can't go ahead and eat Truma, I would have automatically understood that what? That Allah Chalamaisa, that the guy who's only there for a couple of years also can't eat Truma. Even though I could have justified the inclusion of Sachir, why? Because also we have a concept. Milsa da'asi b'kal v'chomer, milsa da'asi b'kal v'chomer, tarach v'kasav lakra. I will say sometimes you could have something that is learned out by a kal v'chomer, but the Torah still goes out of its way to write a pasuk, to write it in the pasuk. We'll discuss, there's a beautiful ashkafa associated with that as well. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. Elahacha chad gufahi. I will say by the Amma Ivriya, she is one person. She's one person. Right? In other words, so the Gemara says, Kinafkula benaros, bagros my boy gabe. Now let's say, I understand. By Eved Ivri, I understand why the need to include two different types of avodim. By the Nara, it's interesting, you have a pasuk that teaches you she goes free by Naros and she goes free by Bagros. I will say, but if she's going free by Naros, there's never a case that what? There's never a case of going free by Bagros. Just the drasha itself just seems to be inherently redundant. So the Gemara says, Ella amrabai lo nitzrucha ella lebagar da'ailenis. Interesting. Who are we talking about? We're talking about, we'll say, ultimately again, an islandess. Remember again, who's an islandess? An islandess is a woman who fails to mature physically as a woman. Ultimately again, I will say, now the whole chap with an islandess is, remember, a nara is not just an age, a nara is also a state of physical maturation. The problem with an islandess is she never physically matures. And I will say, so what do we do with an islandess? An islandess, at the age of 20, if she displays no signs of physical maturation, at that point, we then recognize, okay, unfortunately, this girl's an islandess. Because we'll say sometimes you can just have a woman or a girl who's a late bloomer, right? Just develops later on in life. At the age of 20, by that point in time, if she has not developed any signs of womanhood, that's a clear indication that unfortunately something is wrong, and halachically she is diagnosed, so to speak, as an islandess. So I will say, so you could have a case of a woman who skips Naros and ultimately again becomes a Bulgaris. Right? It's interesting. So this islandess, she skips Naros because Naros is not just about age. It's not just about 12 years old. It's 12 years old and 2 hairs, right? 2 pubic hairs. It's 12 years old and some signs of physical maturation. So you could have a woman who skips that, but halachically, again, at 20 years old, we ultimately classify her as a Bulgaris. So that would be a case of where, again, you would need a drasha for Bagros, even though you have a drasha for Naros. Okay, interesting. You would have thought Benaros teipok, Benaros la teipok. So you might have thought that only a woman who reaches Naros ultimately goes out by Bagros. I'm sorry, if a woman who doesn't go out by Naros, ultimately maybe she doesn't go out by Bagros. Kamash Malon, no. Kash Pasuk gives me 2 different exits for the Amma Ivriya. Either Naros or Bagros. Incredible. Maskif Lamar Baravashi, Valav Kavachomer, who I understand why wouldn't it be a Kavachomer? If the development of physical signs of maturation, I will say, which do not remove a girl from her father's domain, because remember again, physical signs of maturation do not remove a girl from the authority of her father, but yet they do remove her from the authority of her master if she's an Amma Ivriya. Bagros, Shemotzia Mershus Av, Enodin Shemotzia Mershus Adon. Certainly Bagros, we'll say when a girl becomes a Bulgaris, she is automatically removed from the domain of her father. Her father has no rights in her anymore. Certainly that should remove her from the domain of her master. So why do I need a drasha to teach me that? Ela Amar Mar Barabashi, Lo Nitzrucha Ela Leikar Zina Da'ilanis. That I will say is actually very interesting. The pasuk is coming to teach me about the actual sale. I will say the ability to sell a girl who is an islandess as an Amma Ivriya. I might have thought the Asya Simani Naros Havizvina, the Lo Asya Simani Naros Lo Havi Zvina Zvina. I'll say you might have thought as follows. Maybe it's only in a case where a girl ultimately develops signs of physical maturation that a sale of an Amma Ivriya is valid. But if she never develops sign of physical maturation, maybe what? Maybe the sales are valid. I will say, actually, if you take a quick look, I'll just show it to you. I'll tell it to you outside. Tosis, the last Tosis on Dalad Amid Aleph, the last couple of lines, he says, "Dehachi kamar v'lo havi zvina zvina v'tzarecha adon lahachzir masel va'av yachzir hakasef." I will say the Havamina is maybe when it's only when a girl ultimately develops signs of physical maturation that Allah Lamaisa we say, okay, this was a valid sale. But if she never develops signs of physical maturation, maybe the sale itself was never a valid sale. It was never a valid sale. And therefore, Allah Lamaisa, the money has to be returned, the earnings has to be returned. Kamash Malon, no. Kamash Malon say that even if she fails to develop signs of physical maturation, Allah Lamaisa, the sale is a valid sale, right? And in the specific case of an islandess who essentially bypasses the stage of Narus, she will go free once declared a Bogeres at the age of 20. Incredible. Kamash Malon, v'yatzachinam. Therefore, we'll say the pasuk v'yatzachinam, that Allah Lamaisa, even an islandess who becomes a Bogeres, ultimately goes free. Incredible. Ulamar Barabashi, we'll say Dalam base 4b, first line. Ulamar Barabashi, the Amar Valav Kavachomer, who. So we'll say, according to Mar Baravashi, who says that we could learn this whole thing out from a Kavachomer, right? So we'll say, remember again, Mar Baravashi was saying that Halacha Lamaisa, what's the Kavachomer? If simanim, signs of physical maturation, which do not remove a girl from her father's domain, but do remove her from the master's domain, bagros, which removes a girl from her father's domain, ultimately certainly remove her from the master's domain. So we answered that by saying, you're right, to come out from a Kavachomer, milsa da'ase b'Kavachomer tarach v'kasav lakra. Right? We'll say there is a concept that sometimes even something learned out from a Kavachomer, the Torah still goes out of its way to write it in a pasuk. The kasav is right. Tarach v'kasav lakra. Hani mili heichad leka l'shanuye. That's only true of us when you don't have another use for the pasuk. I will say, but again, when you have another use for the pasuk, we certainly prefer to go ahead and use that pasuk. Incredible. The Tana our Tana learns it out from a separate place. That will say again. Now we're going back a little bit to what we were talking about before. So we'll say, remember again, the Gemara is still focusing a bit on Kiddushin Kasef. Where do we know the source for Kiddushin Kasef? So we'll say, so again, this has been a long journey. The simple answer to that question is the Yatzachina in Kasef, right? That's the simple answer. So the Gemara says, "V'tana ma'isla mehacha." Our Tana brings from another place to Sanyo, ki yikach ish isho ba'ala, v'hayalam tinsachein be'inav, ki matza ba ervas davar. So we'll say, the pasuk says, if a man will marry a woman, and he asks, now, the specific pasuk that it's actually talking about over here, we'll say, is, if a man will marry a woman, and ultimately, again, she doesn't find favor in his eyes, why? Because he found a matter of immorality. Ultimately, again, he could divorce her. Pasuk by get. So we'll say, again, the pasuk totally uses lashon ki yikach ish isha, and I will say, it's going back to Bais Midrash. The lashon of kicha, of taking, is the lashon of kasef. From where do we know that? From the Chenu Omer, Nasati kasef hasoda kach mimeni. Parshas Chayisara, Ephron. So we'll say, this is kicha from Ephron, v'alo dinu. And I will say it's a Kavachomer. So I'll say, so again, the emergence going back. Remember, so here's the good news. What's the good news? The good news is everyone is agreeing that Kesef works for Kiddushin. What are they arguing about? What's the source? So again, we just spent an incredible amount of time. The Yatzachina Ein Kasef, that's one. Other possibility is Ki Yikach Ish Isha Ba'ala, Gzera Shavav, Kicha, from Ephron. Kicha by the purchase of Manasa Machpelah means money. Ki Yikach by marriage also means money. The Gemara says, "I was a Kavachomer, V'alo Dinu, Uma Ama Ivriya She'ena Niknes B'Bia Niknes B'Kesef." But saying Ama Ivriya, Hebrew maidservant, cannot be acquired with Bia, but can be acquired with Kesef. So we'll say marriage, which can be effected through Bia, doesn't it go without saying that it can be effected through Kesef as well? No, Yivama Tochiach. Yivama will show you that that's not necessarily true. Why Rabbi say? Sheniknis b'biyah ve'eno niknis b'kesef. So also remember again, a Yibum relationship could only be affected by biyah, right, and not by kesef, Well, Mali Yivam Shekin in niknis b'shtar. Well, Yivam is different also because a Yibum relationship cannot be created through a shtar. Tomar bezu sheniknis b'shtar. But ultimately, I will say both an Ama Ivriya as well as a marriage can be created through shtar. Talmud lomar ki yikach ish. So the Gemara says ha lama likra. So the Gemara says ha'asila amravashi mishum deikal meimar meikara dina de pircha. So we'll say that the problem ultimately is the pasuk is needed. Why? Because the kavachomer is inherently flawed. Why is the kavachomer inherently flawed? So the Gemara says mehecha kamaisis lame amma ivriya. Right? Why are you trying? We'll say remember again. Where are you trying to bring in amma ivriya from? Remember we were saying just like an amma ivriya could be acquired through kesef, right? But not biyah. So to an isha who can be acquired through biyah certainly can be acquired through kesef as well. So the Gemara says the kavachomer is flawed. Why is the kavachomer flawed? Shekein yotza bekesef tomar bezu shein yotza bekesef. We'll say remember again an amma ivriya could also go out with kesef. Right? She could buy her way out of servitude. I will say you can't buy your way out of marriage. Talmud lomar ki yikach ish. Therefore, I will say the pasuk says ki yikach ish. I will say so. Therefore, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is the source for kiddushin kesef is ultimately again gzer shavav kicha from Ephron. Ki yikach ish. Right? Nasati kesef asali kach mimeni. Just like kach by the Ephron ultimately meant money, so to over here means money as well. V'itzrich lemechtav ki yikach ish. I will say it has to say over ki yikach ish. Why? Dikas of Rachmani ki yikach. So I will say that by the way, Rabbi Gemara is saying, fine, I understand the kicha. Why does it have to say ki yikach ish? If a man will take, why not just say ki yikach? I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, Hava amina, ikas of Rachmana ki yikach, Hava amina, kiddushin diyav la bal dida havu. Because of Rachmana, the yatza chinam. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Because had it just said, I'm sorry, ki yikach, because of Rachmana ki yikach, because had it just said ki yikach, I will say, I would have thought what? I would have thought, Havamina, kiddushin diyayev la bal didahavu. I would have thought ultimately again, the money that the husband gives her, ultimately again, becomes hers. Because of Rachmana, the Yatzachinam. So we'll say, I'm sorry, let me clarify for just a moment over here. So very quickly, remember now essentially we have two psukim for Kesef Kiddushin. What are the two psukim? Pasuk number 1, V'yatzachinam in Kesef. Pasuk 2, Kikach ish isha. Why do you need both? So we'll say, so the answer is, right, halacha l'maisa, because had it just said Kikach ish, I would have said, okay, Kesef Kiddushin works. And who does the money go to? The woman herself. Therefore, V'yatzachinam in Kasav comes to teach me that ultimately it goes to the father. The Kasav Rachmana V'yatzachinam, and had it just said V'yatzachinam, Hava Amina Hecha Diyayev Le'ihi Lididei V'kidashto Havi Kiddushin. Furthermore, again, I will say, had it just said V'yatzachinam, I would have thought that maybe the Kesef Kiddushin could even be given from the woman to the man. Right? As long as someone gives Kesef Kiddushin, that's going to be enough. Therefore, again, Kesef Rachmani ki yikach v'lo ki sikach. Therefore, I will say the pasuk says ki yikach. That what? That halacha l'maisa, it is the man who has to give the Kesef Kiddushin ultimately again to the woman, and not vice versa. So I will say, if we bring this together, something amazing emerges. So now we'll say it's so beautiful when everything comes together. So the Maisa again, now we have two psukim that teach me Kesef Kiddushin. What are the two psukim? Number 1, V'yatzachinam in Kesef, right? Teaches me there's no Kesef to the Adon by the Amma Ivriya, but there is Kesef ultimately to the father. Pasuk number 2, Ki yikach ish isha gzer shavav kicha mistei Ephron. Why do I need both? So I will say essentially what kikach ish isha teaches me is that halacha l'maisa Kesef Kiddushin must be a husband-driven process where the husband is giving money to the wife. And ultimately the Yatzachinam in Kesef teaches me that at least through the age of Naros, who gets to keep that Kesef Kiddushin? Not the woman herself, but her father. So again, fully beautiful. I'll just end off. I have 1 minute left. Literally 1 minute left. I'll just tell you very quickly. The Gemara put out there a fascinating phrase, this concept that we saw by Mar Baravashi, who said that sometimes we have an idea of even something that could be learned out by a Kal V'chomer, milsa da'aseh b'Kal V'chomer, tarach v'kasav l'kra. That sometimes even if you have a pasuk that ultimately could be learned out from, or a concept that can be learned out from a Kal V'chomer, the Torah goes out of its way to write a pasuk. Why? What's the pshat? Why would the Torah do that? Shabbos Rabbi Yitzchak of Zechus Yogin Aleinu says something absolutely amazing. The Rebbe said, "What's the difference between a pasuk and a Kal V'chomer?" He says a Kal V'chomer is a use of the intellect. Kal V'chomer is something that I arrive at through the use of my own intellectual acumen. I would say a pasuk is the Dvar Hashem, is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What the Gemara is teaching us, I will say, is that sometimes even something that you could arrive at your own intellect, that shouldn't be the motivation for why you do it. Why do we do the things we do in life? Because the Ribono Shel Olam told us to do it. Because at the end of the day, I love the Ribono Shel Olam so much, and I value my relationship with him so much, that whatever he asks me to do is what it is that I'm going to do. I understand it, I don't understand it. I arrived at the conclusion, I didn't arrive at the conclusion. The truth is, absolutely, wholly, and totally irrelevant. Even milsa de'aseh b'Kal V'chomer, even something I think I understand, it's not my understanding that is my motivation. It's tarach v'kasav l'kra. It's the fact that it's the Dvar Hashem. And I will say, sometimes you hear this and it sounds like an authoritarian statement, but it's not. I will say, so Chodesh Elul. So Chodesh Elul habo aleinu l'tova. Right? The month of Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved is. I will say, what does it mean to be in love? What does it mean? You're like, I have no idea. Right? Right? What does it mean to be in love? What it means to be in love is all you want to do is do for the other person. All you want to do is take care of the other person. All you want to do is make sure you're meeting the needs of the other. I will say Chodesh Elul is the month to re-energize our love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm in love with you. It's not just that I serve you. I'm in love with you, just like I know that you're in love with me. That's the pshat. I will say, milsa da'aseh b'Kal V'chomer, tarach v'kasav l'kra, is the ultimate demonstration of love. I'm going to do whatever you ask of me, and not because I understand it, but because we're in a relationship. And if I love you and you love me, if you need something from me, I'm here to do it. Whether I understand it, whether I don't understand it, that's the commitment I make to this relationship. I will say, what a way to start Chodesh Elul. Shkoyach.